Dia Huits Maccorja. Welcome to Tales from the Land, a participatory community research project where we, the Green Step community, are inquiring into the 21st century realities of food production, farming and living well with the land.
I'm Mel.
And I'm John.
And we're your hosts.
In these podcasts and online events, we'll use the arts of conversation and storytelling to listen, learn and create new understandings of one another and the multitude of approaches being used to engage with the complexities of the climate and biodiversity crises we find ourselves living in. As we go, we'd love to hear from you about your experience, struggles, ideas and visions for a sustainable, prosperous and just future for all. Please send us your ideas to thegreenstep3@gmail.com and we'll include what emerges as we engage with policy consultations for land use in Ireland. Our ancestral practices of tending to the land are rooted in our Irish culture, heritage and language. How can we weave these rooted wisdoms together with modern solutions for sustainability? We'll meet with you and a variety of folk to explore these questions together. We intend to listen and learn from the tales of the land and see where the journey takes us. Dia Huits Maccorja. I think I need a cúpla focal ella, a couple other words to be including. My Irish is slowly improving after years of rebelling against the system. I remember I used to say in school, why do we have to learn Irish? It's a dying language. What a waste of time. I'm like, oh, Mel, you know. I really wish I'd had better crack in school with Irish. I had some really great teachers. But I do think the best way we could be learning Irish is to come into class, everyone sit in a circle, make a cup of tea, no notebooks, no books, just sit around and chat about your days, about your jokes, about your life and listen to each other. I really think that's the best way we could have learned Irish. And to have a class like that in school where we could have went and just sat and talked and had a bit of a laugh, you know, every couple hours in class in school would have been just beautiful. So I think there's a lot of reform that's needed in the system around teaching Irish. Now, I have a few wonderful friends who are Irish teachers and who are really embracing many new ways to include people with different learning abilities. But I think the rigidity of the schooling system and the examination system is just too rigid for a language as fluid and creative as Gaeilge. So they're just some of my thoughts on Irish as I strive to get better myself at speaking. I used to always say Tommy go fásach, but now I'm switching the affirmation to say Tommy go hintach. I'm good at it rather than I'm terrible at it. And yeah, if anyone has some nice Irish phrases they'd like to share, please do let us know through the Green Step on the website. You can email us at thegreenstep3, that's the number 3, @gmail.com, and we'd be delighted to hear from you. At the same time, if you have any ideas that have been tweaked from previous episodes or indeed this one, please do let us know. We want to hear from you. And most especially, we have 2 live events up and coming on May 28th from 7 until 9 and June 4th, the same time. These events are going to be on Zoom, so you can tune in from everywhere. It is our sincere wish and hope that by the time it comes around next year, we'll be able to do something similar, but in person. What we're finding as we go with policy in mind is that policy is just not up to scratch in many ways. And some think that maybe we just need to be going beyond policy. So this research exploration is opening us up to new ways of doing things, new ways of being together, from donor economics to decolonial perspectives to collaboration and co-creation. I hope you're really feeling connected to the community here. The Green Step Facebook community on the Facebook is hopping. It's a really lovely place to share ideas and thoughts and bring your questions and curiosities. And you are very welcome to join us there. definitely open to workshopping ways that this community can be held away from Facebook. And so if anyone has any helpful ideas there, please do let us know. And this week we're going to look at farming in a little bit more detail. We have Ger Buckley, who is a dairy farmer, joining us, along with Tírloch, who is a market gardener up in Cavan, and Mark Robbins, who is an ecologist based in Cork and has experience engaging with policy. We had a beautiful meander through our conversation together, and it is a joy to have you with us. So please enjoy. I'm going to pour us a cup of tea and we shall dive in together. Digwit, welcome everybody to the sport episode of Tales from the Land, where we are looking at the agricultural system here in Ireland and the world and how it relates to farmers, farming, or policy. And this process is about us engaging with policy, but also weaving together our community along the way and having some really robust conversations and discussions about the multitude of approaches that we can use to actually lean into the climate and biodiversity crisis. And the amount of places where farming and biodiversity overlap is phenomenal. And we have a really beautiful mix of people in the room today. So we've got Ger Buckley, who I met last year, at the start of last year, planting a bunch of trees down in his lovely farm. And that was a wonderful day out. And I think it was under the first full moon of last year. It felt very auspicious. And Tírloch O'Brien is here through FICRA, who was on last week and is really interested in soil health and is a first generation farmer. And then Mark Robbins is an ecologist who has a wealth of experience with policy and wildlife of all kinds. So I think the best way I can do this is to invite everybody to introduce themselves. And as we go around, if you could introduce as well, and maybe bring in your introduction the place you're in now, where you live and what it's like there. I know that Ger has come from a mucky day of making a new pond. So we might start with you, Ger, if that sounds good.
Yeah, I'm intensive dairy farmer. We milk about 180 cows. I've always had an interest in the environment and in nature, and I suppose I'm not motivated by money. So like looking at a set of accounts and looking at the bottom line doesn't float my boat. So today we're making a pond. We made a reed bed. We've planted, I suppose, a couple of thousand trees now on the farm, and we're in the process of putting up a few owl boxes, and I think that kind of diversity actually makes the farm very interesting. A few years ago, I suppose I'd have looked at farms that would have no ditches, just wire and lanes, and thought, God, it's a lovely, simple layout. But I suppose now, what I think is that we're probably the most invasive species of the whole lot, and nothing gives us the right to just clear all the ditches and clear everything, and so we're trying to put some of that back, and be grateful for the amount of stuff that we have and what we've got from generations before, and the ditches and the trees they've planted that we can enjoy, and hopefully we can pass that on to the next generation.
Gorgeous. Thank you, Ger. It's really good to have you here. Tírloch, I know you're also on a lovely little plot of land. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm based in Cavan, for, like you said, first generation farmer. So I went into this quite naive, to be honest with you. I spent 2 years on the Organic Centre and with Jim Cronin, and they had lovely setups, beautiful farms, systems. And I was like, oh, this is lovely. So I said I'd set up my own, and it's extremely challenging. I've never worked as hard in my entire life, but I have a lot of support. So for example, today I had my parents are retired, so they were over and they were sowing lettuce and beetroot, and I was sowing carrots. And I have support from my other uncle and my partner's father. So I have a lot of help. you know, I'm not doing this on my own. I don't think it's possible to do this on your own. But I have this acre, about at 1.2 acres, and within it I'm allowed to do whatever I want, essentially. Outside of it, there's another 70 acres of former dairy land, and now they just rent it out to farmers, beef and dairy, which I'd love to cover in trees, but I don't have control. So within this field, I've been planting as much trees as I can. I've planted, so far, I've planted about 300 trees. I'm putting in living windbreaks. I'm trying to farm minimum till, no dig where possible. I'm leaving wild areas. I'll always sow loads of flowers because I'll put them in my salad bag, but they'll also be good for you know, birds, bees, etc. I'm just trying to create a lovely space. I want to be able to walk into that space and not. I don't believe in the old way of farming where it's you have to work 7 days a week, all the hours that you can. I want to try and create a system where I work, you know, and I finished 5. I have my weekends. I take, you know, January, February off, but also where I work is a joy to be in. So I can go there on a weekend and I can sit and I can have a barbecue. I can drink a beer or have a glass of wine. I just don't want it to be drudgery. So that's not my goal. So we'll see. I'm almost there, and I want to try and employ a more biological approach with adding compost teas and extracts. So that's the next step in my process.
Gorgeous. Thank you, Tírloch. It's great to have you. We might pass over there to Mark.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I actually grew up right in the centre of London, about a mile away from King's Cross Station, if any of you know it. I lived there as a boy. When I got to 18, and it's a fantastic place to live. I'm being in the centre of a huge city with so many things to do and see, and, you know, exciting place to be. But when I got to 18, I got out and went as far away as I could from home, which for me then was Devon, which is rather like Cork, where I live now. You know, it's green, it grows good grass, it's wet, it's got some hill grounds, fantastic coast, and you know, a rich place for all sorts of farming. And then I wandered through a kind of career. I'm semi-retired now, but I wandered through a career, firstly as a scientist for a decade, then working for environmental NGOs, mostly in England, in Italy briefly, in America for a while, and then for the last couple of years here in Ireland. But I am pretty much retired. I'm really enjoying being involved in a couple of projects, and I really like to kind of get involved in making good things happen around farming and the environment. I just think there's so much potential for some easy stuff and some harder stuff, but, you know, if we can learn to work together, you know, we can make so much progress. Along the way, I did get dragged into quite high level politics, so I could kind of experience around some of that, particularly around way back when, but around foot and mouth disease in England, which is the most horrific moment in the countryside, I would say. You know, it wasn't just for the farmers, many of whom would be in tears having experienced that, but, you know, for people around them, for the whole kind of rural sense of place and purpose. So along the way, I got dragged into various kind of political issues, and here I am living in Cork and really loving it.
Welcome, Mark. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark.
So much of this project for me has actually come from exploring sacred sites last year and being out on the land. And yeah, I'm just in today from the Neighbour Foods Market nearby, which has really been a shift actually just from recording these episodes of, I always had this kind of, I don't have the biggest income and kind of going, oh, that's really expensive, I can't afford it. And actually just the conversations I've been having so far is like, no, I just need to reorientate my priorities, and actually paying for good food and supporting local producers is what I need to be doing. And the sea was a lovely, tantalizing stop off as well on the way. I rushed back, so I've still got cold feet coming to the conversation. But yeah, I think our trajectory for maybe to begin our conversation is to go back before we go forward, as we look at the policies that might be coming down the line and what we're doing, you know, into the future. So much of this is rooted in the land and going, you know, eons back. I think the newest update is that there's been people living on this island for 30,000 years and working with the land. So yeah, I feel as if the fairies are here supporting this exploration. So I might throw over to John there to start us off with a story.
Hello all, how are things? So today we're going to be talking just quickly about the fairies. And the fairies in Ireland are not what we see in the Disney and all of that ideas. They're not kind of beautiful and lovely and cute. No, they were something you didn't mess with. They were something you had a bit of respect for. The idea is that they came from the Tuatha Dé Danann. So one of the most ancient books written in Ireland, it's the Book of Invasions. It was written in the 11th century. Dictates, says about the 6 invasions of Ireland of the different people. What is quite interesting was it was first taken as complete truth. Then we got to the 19th century and it was like, yeah, that's kind of quite a bit of myth. There's nothing really there. And now we're getting into the 21st century when we're like, yeah, we found evidence of humans 30,000 years ago. So it's beginning to seem as if there may have been something in this oral history that was kind of passed down and then written down. But the Tuatha Dé Danann themselves, they were the 5th invasion, and they were fought by the Sons of the Gael, the Miletians they were called. And so that's who we are descended of. And so after the war, there was a fight, and they decided to come together for basically a peace treaty. And they said, okay, so we'll take one half of the land and you'll take the other half. And the Sons of the Gael came with this to Tuatha Dé Danann. They said, yeah, that'll work. And then the Sons of the Gael said, I have one condition. We choose which piece of land we get. And Tuatha Dé Danann said, okay, so I'll accept that. That's what we shall do. And then Sons of the Gael turned and said, yes, so we will take all of the land above and you will take all of the land below. And that's how the Tuatha Dé Danann lost their land. And that is why they retreated into the fairy forts, into the glens, into the dark hidden places, and why to this day they hold an enmity towards us, because we have tricked them out of their land. And then that's where the idea of the fairies came from this old past. The thought is the reason they're called the little people, and why kind of the idea of leprechauns and stuff came from them was because people were so afraid of their power, they had to think of a way to kind of belittle them so that they wouldn't be scared speaking about them. And that's how the term the little people came about. And so then we can talk about that ancient past, but that is it has bled through into the modern day. We will see in the middle of central fields, you will see fairy forts. You will see Mesolithic and Neolithic ring forts still in the central fields untouched in many places. And then there are still the stories of people who've gone into these ring forts and have cut them down and bulldozed them. And they say you have no luck afterwards once you do so. So I was listening to Eddie Lennon today. Magnificent man. I would recommend all of you to listen to some of his old stories. They're just magnificent. But he was speaking about when they were building the M18 between Galway and Limerick. And they bulldozed a part of an old Mesolithic fort there. So one of the fairy forts. A third of it they cut down. And now they say to this day that road is always closed. There have been about 50 accidents in around that area there. And so then there's something going on. And even if you don't believe there is, even if you don't think there's anything to do with the fairies or any of this, it's still our ancient history. It's still our ancient past. This is still monuments built 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. And to think that they are often destroyed so that we can kind of get one more head of cattle, or we can get kind of one more acre of land for tillage, it does make me quite sad. So that's what I thought I'd begin today. The fairies, they may still be with us, they may still not, but I think the past and the history there with our early man is still an important thing we should value.
Yeah, thank you, John. Beautifully told. And I'm wondering, Ger just offered us a lovely ancestral kind of lineage of his farm, which has been passed down for many years. And yeah, I'd love to just maybe pass over to you and just see where you'd like to go, what you'd like to come in with on this kind of, bringing the older ways of looking at things into this modern way of being with the land as we look, at the climate crisis.
I suppose one of the things that struck me there when you were talking, we have a Laharn a stone circle on our farm.
Yeah.
And I know very little about it. And someone very kindly gave me a book that was published by Cork County Council recently. And there was a full explanation about all the stone circles and all the archaeological stuff around Cork County. And I believe there's a book on archaeology, there's a book on bridges, there's a book on houses. But I fully believe that this kind of stuff should be taught in schools. And we have gained so much knowledge in the past hundreds of years, but we have lost so much as well. And I think we've lost so much in the last, even say from my father's generation to our generation. And if you speak to most older people this time of the year, and what they're talking about is how late the trees are coming out this year, for example. And but any young people don't know that. But we all know what the Kardashians are doing, and we know where Man United are in, you know, and I don't know if is there nature studies and archaeology studies in schools, but if there isn't, there should be. And it's probably a bit like Shakespeare, where you're learning it at a time when you're not really interested in it, but it's always there, and it'll come back to you at a later stage. But I mean, all that kind of stuff should be, like, I went to an ag college where we were microchipped to know all about what sprays to put out, what fertilizers to put out, what makes you more money, what are the KPIs in agriculture. And it's important, but it's not more important than the stuff that you're talking about there, John. You know, it's like you have to have time for that as well. And I personally would like to see more, to learn more about that, you know, about the stone circles, what the techniques that these people use, the knowledge they had. Like now we have an app for it, you know, whereas you just download it for $4.99. Like how they got these big massive stones, and a community came together and put them all in, and they were able to, they knew when to plant their vegetables, and like, I don't think that should be lost, and there's an awful lot of that, and that should be passed on to the next generation. And like with mental health and everything now, it's so important. There is so much going on around us that we don't see. You know, it's like we're in the dark. Like, even since I did the course last year on permaculture, you know, you're driving down, you're seeing all these different trees, and you're seeing all these different plants. And one day I was going into Aldi, and there was a line of, in Macroom, there was a line of willow trees on the way up, and I was stopping, and I had an app, and I had the app out the window, and I was to see what kind of a willow it was and what was the species. And next thing, a horn blew, and when I looked back, there was about 4 or 5 cars behind me, and I said, "Oh my God," you know. But I just think it's good stuff to be thinking about, and you know, there should be more of it around.
Yeah, thank you. Tírloch, I know you mentioned there before we started recording how being a first generation farmer and working with the land has really impacted your mental health in what sounds like a positive way. I'd love to hear your thoughts there on anything that's been said, but it'd be great to hear your voice.
Yeah, I mean, it has a huge impact. I think I was suffering from panic attacks, anxiety for a long time since I was 16, and that just snowballed into what I would like depression and even paranoia. But there was lifestyle factors were definitely part of it, but I left all that behind. And then I was in a career. Eventually I got to a career where I was making what I thought I wanted was money. And they just started getting worse. All these mental health issues started getting worse. And I just thought that there's something else deeper. I think I was like, it's my body, or something's telling me that I need to do something more meaningful. And intuitively, for some reason, I decided to do farming. I have a friend who's got a farm in Galway. I watched him on Facebook, and I was like, God, that looks great. And I was interested in food, so I went for it. And yeah, I mean, the moment I decided to do it, I think from the moment even, I left that career, my mental health started shifting. It started changing. And I can say at this point, I don't suffer from any of that stuff. Like I do get stressed, and that can create anxiety, but I can understand what that anxiety, what's behind it. I get to be outside all the time. I get to get my hands in the soil, and I get to plant trees, which, you know, is a really, I don't know, it's a very, I've never had the feeling before, but I planted loads of trees. And the other day, or every couple of weeks, I'll walk amongst them, and it's just so calming. It's just, it's, even when you see the little, you know, they're budding, and you're like, oh, that's lovely. Like, and it's not like, oh, I did that, but I'm like, I helped that happen. And like the other day, it was extremely windy, and I was watching my vegetables getting damaged, and like a lot of rage was building inside me. I was just like, oh, God damn it. Because it's such an open land that there's wind coming from everywhere. There's trees have been chopped down. Hawthorn has been chopped down, which I kind of felt bad about. So I planted loads of hawthorn. They're a fairy tree, and rowan. And I couldn't sit in that rage. I was like, oh, Jesus. And I was just walking around, couldn't get it done. And I just went and I walked in the trees, and I walked around them, and it really just helped me it didn't make the rage go away, but I just kind of like, you know, it's all right. You don't have to kind of push it down. So yeah, it's extremely beneficial. And I've been on farms. I was on Jim Cronin's farm, like I said, and his wife, Rebecca, was doing a pilot program for social farming. So she had, while I was there, I was living on the farm, she'd have people coming for 6-week stints, people like, you know, mildly mentally, you know, disabled, and people to severe, you know, people who just couldn't interact. And it was just amazing to see the transformation, you know, and all they had was 6 weeks, you know, and by the end of the 6 weeks, they wouldn't want to be leaving. They'd be, you know, you'd be connecting with them. We'd have lunch with them every day. So I saw it firsthand, and I've experienced it with myself as well. So yeah, there's a huge benefit to working the land, to reconnecting with something that, you know, our ancestors did, and we're being kind of pulled away from it through, like Ger was saying, with apps, with technology. The soul can be sucked out of it, like, so we kind of have to rediscover that. But it's there, so yeah,
gorgeous. It's really, I really feel it as you're talking, like the need for reconnection. And like, I've looked a lot on about eco grief, and we really get sick when we're disconnected from nature and her cycles. And for me, a big part of my recovery from mental illness as well was connecting to the cycles of nature. And it's just profound. I feel like so many people could benefit from it. And then I look at the way the systems are kind of run, and the way the policies are done, and they're so niche and focused. Like 2 weeks ago, Dermot Robinson, they have a family farm, mentioned that he thought one of the solutions should be to reduce the cost of housing, you know, and then you could spend more money on food. But like, when it comes to policy, things aren't really looked in that kind of holistic way. And it really frustrates me, because I think if you had more people on the land growing more food, you could help their mental health, you know, and I have this whole logical progression. But then I try and engage it with the system that's there, and I kind of go, oh, okay, that doesn't really work. So I'd love to hear, Mark, if you have any thoughts there on that, and anything else as well.
Yeah, I thought I'd tell 3 stories. I mean, they're not going back into history, but they're part of my history, and they help me explain the world, I think. And to do with environmental projects on farms. And funny enough, they were all called Johns. I'm going to tell the stories of 3 guys called John, who...
It's a good name, Mark. It's a very good name.
Good name. Who all farmed in very different circumstances. The first guy farmed in a big floodplain wetland called the Somerset Levels, which is rather like, the Shannon Callows, great big wet, gets huge amounts of flood water in the winter, sometimes in the summer when people don't want it. If it goes wrong, then homes get flooded and all the rest of it. In parts full of wildlife, but very tricky place for farming when there's too much water. Grows fantastic grass. Was dairy at one stage, but has now gone to beef. Full of history and culture. And there's a guy there who was called John, who I'd worked with on and off for years, who was a dairy farmer, but he also had some beef. And he said to me one day about 10 years ago, he said, "Mark, I finally understand what you're on about." And I thought, well, that's good. You know, we're going to do some good stuff. And then he told me what he'd been doing, and he had been doing good stuff. And then a few seconds later, I thought, oh no, this is terrible. Because I could date when I had the first conversation with this guy called John. It was when, as a kind of campaigning environmentalist, I produced a report which damned a whole load of farmers who were managing water or influencing the managing of water in that floodplain wetland in a way to damage nature. And that guy called John threatened to sue me. So I could actually date that. I could probably find a press cutting, and it was about 20 years long, this kind of conversation. And so for John to say, I finally understand you, Mark, I actually took in quite a bad way. I thought, well, what language I've been using, you know, how have I failed to communicate what I've been doing? Is it me who's changed, or is it John who's changed? Is it the circumstances changed or not? Anyway, so that's a story for me about just how long some conversations take. You know, you can't rush them. You know, sometimes things do fall into place fast, but you know, you've got to take your time. And people are embedded in their situation, you know, in their circumstance, on their farm business, their family, and all the rest of it. You know, so as an environmentalist, asking them to change, it's not always easy. There's lots of reasons why you wouldn't want to change. You know, you've invested, you've got to go through that investment cycle. There's going to be a moment perhaps when you would change. But anyways, that's the story about how long conversations can take. And I know that one took 20 plus years, and I reflect on that myself. Then the other two Johns were farmers who are helping us with a bird conservation project, which is in all the textbooks for European bird recovery programs, for a bird called the cell bunting, which you get right across Europe. You don't get it in Ireland, but in England was declining massively. You only had about 100 pairs of those left from probably 100,000 30 years before. So it was looking
in 30 years.
Yeah,
that's an incredible drop.
It was a bird of mixed farms, and of course, mixed farms gone. And with a bunch of 100 farmers and a good agri-environment scheme, over about 20 years, managed to get that population up to 1,000 pairs. So it's, you know, was a fantastic success, all at the hands of those 100 guys, those 100 farmers. And I just want to very quickly touch on two Johns who helped. So the first guy was John down in Cornwall, who hosted a translocation project where young birds were taken and put into aviaries and fed and eventually released on his ground. And I didn't do the work, but I was a responsible person, you know, holding the budget and all those kind of things. So once a year I'd go down and see John. And I remember, I can still see it, you know, going down the farm lane. I could see this guy standing there looking furious. I thought, oh no, there's trouble, you know, something's gone wrong. I don't know what it is. I get out the car, and for an hour, I suffered a tirade of how everything was wrong. Not to do with the project, but just, you know, from agricultural policy to the weather to, you know, you name it. John was angry. God, he was furious. And at the end of all this, you know, I remember the first time I said, John, what we really need is another couple of acres of spring barley for this bird. Do you think you could help us? He said, yep. And I said, can we look at the best place to do it? We think it'd be here. He said, yep. And I said, so we've got some money to help cover the cost of seed and so on. He said, no problem. And every year I had this kind of experience of going down to see John and having a really tough time with him until I got to the point where I said, John, could you do this thing? And he'd always say yes. Every time. And he was never interested in money. He loved the project, but he wanted to make sure, I think, that he stood his ground. And he wanted to share his worldview. So it's another kind of story of, you know, how we can get these things wrong by talking the wrong language or not giving ourselves enough space. I was very happy to go and see John and have an hour's grief because he always gave us what we needed. So that was that guy. And then the third John helped us. We had a nature reserve, which was bought for the purpose of this bird recovery project. And next door was a huge arable farm, tillage farm, a farm by a guy called John. When we needed some work done on our nature reserve, we needed some fields topping, or we needed to borrow some animals to graze some stuff down, John would always lend us to us. Bring this machine over, do the business, or whatever. And again, I occasionally bump into John, and I remember how wound up John was by the tillage ground he had. You know, it was always kind of worrying. You know, it was intensive ground. You know, things could go wrong. Actually, he came from a family which had land also in South America. So he had a kind of global farming family. But John was, I mean, fantastically successful. But the point I was just about to make is he came onto the nature reserve and helped us do our work for this bird, always saying, "Oh, I just love this." It was kind of something about, he got away from the pressures of his, you know, the very commercial, very, very successful commercial part of his farm. And to, you know, just spend a couple of hours helping, he loved it. And again, you'd never need to twist his arm. You never need to, you know, go in any direction to, but other than say, "John, could you?" And John always would. So there's my stories of 3 Johns, which have kind of been part of my own learning experience about, you know, how easy it is to get the language wrong, how we've got to give each other space, and how that 3rd John, I think he was helping us because he just really liked to get away from the pressures of, you know, the very commercial farm that he was running over the road. Those are very telling things for me.
So, Mark, what I'm really hearing there was about kind of communication and connection. And it was about talking to farmers, you know, working with them rather than...
Well, farmers aren't different to anybody else. And, you know, these are guys who are, you know, had their own pressures. But if we could just get into the right space, you know, things could happen. And actually that cell bunting recovery project, as I said, is in all the textbooks of, you know, a successful project done by 100 farmers who, you know, largely offered their time and machines and animals to help that along.
Sure. Can I ask, and we were speaking about this a small bit before we began a recording, you were speaking about the fact that, and again, we're speaking to it here, farmers and environmentalists often have the same goals. It's just that there's a wrong language is used, or there's a manufactured argument put in there. Would you mind speaking to that?
It's probably a different perception. I suppose, like, every environmentalist, they want the land and the world and the environment to be better for the next generation. Like, sustainability in its definition is, you know, meeting the needs of future generations without undermining the current generation. And I think most farmers want the same. They want to make it better. I suppose really the difference is that what we have, the way we have been taught to farm and the way we've been microchipped, might not be in line with making the environment better for future in some way. And I think, you know, there needs to be more education around, like, we've learned an awful lot. Sometimes, you know, you take 2 steps forward and you need to take 1 step back. And I think, you know, like, agriculture is a 3-legged stool. You have the economic side of it. There's a lot of advances have been made in that in the last 20 years. We've learned an awful lot from New Zealand. You have the environmental side. Like 10 years ago, if you had an IFA meeting or a farmer meeting, and if you mentioned the environment or anything to do with that kind of stuff, you know, you would be a freak nearly. Now there is no meeting without the environment being mentioned, which is actually a good thing.
It's fantastic.
So yeah, like, I mean, some people see it as a threat. It's also a huge opportunity. And then you have the whole social aspect of farming. And I think it's very important to include everybody. And, you know, like what we were saying earlier is that, you know, you have environmentalists talking to environmentalists, you have farmers talking to farmers. If there's a discussion on media and any of the TV programs, they normally drop a bombshell and they're fighting with each other. Whereas I believe they have a lot more in common with each other, and we need to work together, and we need to, you know, share the stories of what's happening and farming to, you know, that we're doing a lot of work for the environment, and people probably are not aware of that. But then, you know, maybe we should be made more aware of some of the unintended consequences of our farming practices that are not good for the environment, and we need to be educated on that. I suppose, Melanie, you kind of started off and you kind of about cheap food, and you know how we have dear houses and cheap food, and food has to be cheap because the cost of living is so high. I often hear people saying, you know, that, you know, 50 years ago, farming was very friendly to the birds. It was very friendly to the environment, but now it isn't. But the fact is that unless you're in the top 10% in efficiency, you're not making money in farming. So part of that efficiency. So like there's a big problem around cheap food. And like our grandparents could, on a farm, could make 60, 70 cows. Parents or grandparents were milking 18, 20 cows and making a great living. The fact is now, if you're not highly stocked and if you're not intensive, the margin is so small that you have to be that intensive in order to make a living. So there's an unintended consequence of cheap food. So it's easy to give out about farmers, but farmers are only doing what they're being asked to do, and we're being asked to produce food cheap. But that is not cheap food. That is very costly food for an environmental, and you know, like even you spoke earlier about mental health and obesity and all these different things. You know, you've like the food we're eating today. Some of it is very good and very healthy and natural, but more of it isn't so good, and it's being shipped in from all over the world. And you know, I have a brother who's a doctor and a brother who's a dentist, and I was talking to a consultant recently, and I was in for a checkup, and he said, you know, I was saying I was the poor relation, and he said, well, people have no problem paying them, but they don't want to pay you. But because farmers are giving cheap, because people are eating rubbish, they end up having to give their money to the doctor and the dentist anyway. So more often that people sit down from different backgrounds, it's no good people who agree with each other talking. It's people who have a different point of view, and it's like I'm not here to tell you my side. I want to listen to what you have to say and see what can I learn from it.
But Ger, as well, it is very important to hear your side as well, because I find a lot of time, especially farmers in the media, are portrayed as the enemy, and I think that's a huge issue. And as well, like to say, like, you are an intensive farmer. Like you have, I think you said to us, you had 180 cattle. So like, in no way are you a small farmer, but also you said you've had a shift in the last while, and kind of like how you've seen farming.
Well, I think bigger farms have potential to do more harm, but they also have a lot more potential to do more good. And at the end of the day, if a lot of these climate problems, you know, putting carbon into the ground, releasing less carbon, you know, farming is a game changer, and it can be the real savior.
Yep.
You can buy paper straws and all that kind of stuff, but it'll make you feel good. It's not going to, in my view, I don't think it's going to save the planet. Farming, we planted 6 acres of mixed species grasses last year as a trial, and it is like you're able to grow nearly as much output, healthier animals, and with much lower inputs. Not only is it good for the environment, but it appears to be good for the animals, and it's good for the farmer. Bad for the trader, bad for the company selling fertilizer, and bad for the big corporations. And hence, there's very little research. If there was somebody making big money out of it, I'm sure there'd be plenty of research done on it.
Could I just share an idea? It was something we tried back in England and it didn't work, but I think I always thought it was a great idea, is that anybody who works on the environmental side of farming should spend 2 weeks on a farm. That doesn't make them a farmer at all, but it does mean they've kind of just seen a few things. They spend a bit of time with the guys whose life is based in those places. As a basic kind of qualification, really, if you're in the civil servant or you're working for an environmental body or wherever you are, some kind of exchange program. Joe, you mentioned you went on a Nuffield scholarship. I mean, these things are just fantastic. You just, you get to see things, talk to people, but I would love to see something like that here, where, the people who work in the department, they spend 2 weeks on a farm. The people who work for the environmental NGOs are in those programs, the EIPs and all those things. You just spend a bit of time with some guys who, like I say, who are living making a business on a farm. So as a basic qualification, and I mean, we could do that in a very formal way, or it could be very informal. But that kind of exchange, would that be good?
I think it would be a fabulous
Absolutely.
thing. It's I don't know if you've heard of Tim Schmidt in the Eden Project.
I have, yeah.
He's one of my favorite people. He's such a character. But in the Eden Project, they actually do that within that all the managers have to work in the kitchen or clean the toilets, and it's actually really beneficial because they understand what the challenges are. It's a bit like Secret Millionaire, you go in and you would say, God, I never knew this was going on, or how can we make this better? And it just gives you understanding. But I mean, I think that's the biggest problem with everything, is trying to see what like, it's easy to criticize somebody else, but you don't know what their challenges are.
Yeah.
And you need to walk in their shoes or be able to put yourself in their position before you can actually judge them.
This is Mel interjecting with a quick little bit of information for you. Thank you so much for being here and donating your ears to us for this hour and a half. I hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as we enjoyed having it. We would love to hear what you think. You can send your ideas, suggestions, comments to thegreenstep3@gmail.com, or you can find us on our website, thegreenstep.org. We have 2 live events coming up on May 28th and June 4th from 7 until 9 p.m. on Zoom. Hopefully this time next year we'll be able to have these events in person, but for now we're having them on Zoom, and you are very welcome to come to this community forum where we can continue these discussions and add more and hear more from the people who arrive in the space on the night. So please do go to the website to book your spot. They're free, but we'd love to know who's coming, so you can book your ticket through Eventbrite, and it would be wonderful to see you there. You can also support us financially by donating. You'll find the link on our website, thegreenstep.org, and this will go toward production fees of editing the podcast and also our policy consultation efforts for John and I and Fiachra behind the scenes as we work away and input what we've learned here into the policy consultations for agri-food and our local development plan. So before we head back to the episode, and we're going to hear some questions from John, I would love to share with you a song by one of our wonderful contributors, Marion Horgan, who's going to take us on a trip down to the Hazelwood to lie beneath the azure sky and just take a little bit of a break from listening to conversation to just listen to the joys of rhythm and music and song. This is reminding me of our first episode where we went to the Hazelwood to see the beginnings of the River Shannon and the well where the hazelnuts that the Salmon of Knowledge was rumoured to have eaten had fallen into the lake. So I hope you enjoy this song, and we'll be back to the episode after.
I walked down to the Hazelwood. Down to the Hazelwood, to the Hazelwood, the Hazelwood. I walked down to the Hazelwood on a lusty April morning. There I found my hazel tree, it was waiting just for me. There I found my hazel tree on a lusty April morning. Blossoms bloomed on every bough, on every bough, on every bough. Blossoms bloomed on every bough on a lusty April morning. I sat down to rest a while, to rest a while, to rest a while. I sat down to rest a while on a lusty April morning. The earth beneath was soft and warm, and I was far from hurt and harm. The earth beneath was soft and warm on a lusty April morning. above was azure blue, azure blue, azure blue. The sky above was azure blue on a lusty April morning. Then I heard a sweet bird sing, and the hazel woods did ring. Then I heard a sweet bird sing on a lusty April morning. Oh, the music filled the air, bewitched my heart and stole my care. Oh, the music filled the air on a lusty April morning. And in that moment all was one, the earth, the moon, the stars, the sun. In that moment all was one on a lusty April morning. I bade farewell to the hazelwood, the hazelwood, the hazelwood. I bade farewell to the hazelwood on a lusty April morning. But the memories in my heart, it's in my heart, oh, ne'er to part. Yes, the memories in my heart of the lusty April morning.
What policies around farming need to change? And again, again, that's a very wide and broad and overarching question. But kind of like, I'd love to hear first Mark and then maybe Ger about that, about what you think policies need to change.
I mean, I might be a bit tough on this. I think the CAP has run its it's unreformable. It's not doing the job we need it to do these days. And I fear that on one side of this equation, I'm full of fear. On the other side of the equation, I'm full of hope, I suppose. But I just think each time it comes around that CAP cycle, we're right at the end of it, aren't we now? There's this bum fight between the politicians and the lobby groups and everybody else. Mm-hmm. Which sector's going to make, there's going to be winners and losers each time round. One sector's going to win over another. And the kind of purpose of it gets forgotten or gets lost, left behind in this high politics of, what's going to happen to that money. I just wonder whether it's run its course, and actually, in 5 or 7 years' time, we might be looking at a food policy. We might be looking at environmental policy. So I fear really that when you do that, when that change comes, I mean, it's happening in England now. Once the treasuries get their hands on that money, they cut. So that's the kind of fear side of the equation. The other side of the equation is, I think it becomes so much easier or clearer for people. What the investment is for, what this public investment is for quality food, let's say.
Yeah.
At the moment, I think it's totally unclear. The payments, the basic payments. Why are farmers getting basic payments? What are they for? What's the deal? What's the social deal? And then even with some of the environmental payments, it's not very clear. So if you're talking about the mother of all policies, the CAP, I wonder whether it's run its course, and next time around we're looking at something very, very different.
Yeah, I really hear you. And I hear there, you're saying, I heard it a lot the other day, winners and losers, farmers and consumers, all these labels like separating us out. I know we are consumers, but we're also contributors to the system, and we can benefit. We're all people. And I heard a beautiful saying recently, that for a new vision of the future, we need new language. We need to be expanding the language we're using and going beyond this idea of winners and losers. And I've heard that in a couple of the discussions about CAP and the agri-food policy. It's regularly used, and all of this kind of othering. And I know, Tírloch, you mentioned like your first generation, you've leaned into this. I heard a joke last week at the
there was a discussion on CAP with the Irish Farmers Journal. Pippa Hackett said, well, and you know, some people might want to become farmers, and the guy interviewing just kind of scoffed and said, yeah, until they realize what it's like. So I'd love to hear about your experience kind of engaging with that as a newbie.
Yeah, well, like, see, I have very little understanding of CAP. I'm not eligible for anything. I'm too small, so I can get there is the organic grant, but I'd have to be cultivating 5 acres. I wouldn't know where to begin. I don't use a tractor. I'm a quarter of an acre at the moment, and I don't want to go into 5 acres. I believe that we don't need to get bigger. We just need to work smarter and use the space smarter. So CAP and all these things, I don't fully understand them. And this whole idea of, like, I think more young people are moving towards farming, but I'll admit it myself, when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, like, if somebody goes to me, you're going to be a farmer, I'd scoff at the idea, and I'd probably make some sort of derogatory statement, because you'd just be like, I'm not going to be a farmer. I'm going to work in the city in a job. I don't want to be a farmer going out shoveling shit. You know what I mean? And it's awful to think. And then now that I'm farming, it's such a complex, really, really hard, difficult thing to do. And not physically, mentally, emotionally, everything. The farm or the land I rent off, it's unbelievable what he can put his hand to. It's amazing. Like, and he never finished school. He just worked on a farm all his life, and he's built the infrastructure around here. He can build anything. He helped me put up the tunnels, and he'd be doing farmer's maths in his mind, and I'd just be blown away. I'd just be like, I don't have a clue what you just did. I don't know. But next thing you know, there's a huge 100-foot tunnel standing there, and it's solid, you know. And then I've made friends with other farmers who've been young men my age, but they've been farming since they were boys. And it's just amazing what these men can do with their hands, with no engineering degrees. Like, they build their own trailers, and it's, you know what I mean? I don't think farmers are given credit. I think they've been scapegoated by probably other industries. Like, you know, the idea that cows are causing climate change is bonkers. It's a biological, it's a creature, it's an animal. Surely it needs to be managed more efficiently and better. But you know what I mean? When there's cars pumping out gas and planes, and everybody's like, no, we need to have less cows. You're just like, no, that doesn't make any sense. There's a deliberate, I without getting too conspiratorial, I feel there's a deliberate agenda and an attack on farmers, which isn't nice. Even whether you're organic, conventional, intensive, regenerative, whatever it is, at the end of the day, you know, everybody eats 3 meals a day, and they probably do not consider what those 3 meals. I certainly wouldn't have before this. I wouldn't have even known how a carrot was grown. I wouldn't have known the energy in it. I would have gone in and bought a bag for 70 cents and ate it without considering anything. And a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't even consider their clothes. You know what I mean? If they're wearing cotton clothes, you know what I mean? That just didn't just come out of a packet. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff in our lives that, you know, farmers are responsible for. If we go back to policy, from my understanding, I think we need to just shift away from, you know, paying for more acreage. It needs to be incentivized for ecological things. And I don't know if this is a wacky idea, but I personally think everybody should get a living wage. Farmers should be paid correctly for their produce. None of this lost leader carry on. They should be paid what they deserve, what they should earn the right money. And if everybody's getting a living wage, then they can comfortably, or at least attempt to pay for some decent, good quality food that is going to help them, their health and the environment.
Yeah, really well said.
Fantastic. Thank you.
It came up last week. We were talking about donut economics, the week before last. And it was the exact same, that idea of the lost leaders and needing to actually, like, a universal basic income as a potential solution.
Can I say there, Tírloch, I think you hit the nail on the head something there. You said that you're not eligible for anything under any policy currently. No. And so again, how on earth are you going to incentivize new farmers to come into an area or to be a small farmer. It seems if you can only be a large farmer.
I think
Yeah.
there's also an ancestral wounding there as well, like from the famine and from being literally pushed off our land for generations. And I know that might be a far stretch, but with epigenetics, they're actually seeing how these things can be passed on, like deep grief, anger, like the kind of want to have a place, I think, is really strong in all of us, you know, and I think that needs to be recognized.
Like, I think Mark was spot on with people need to see what farmers do. Like, even my parents coming here, or my brothers, my friends, like, you know, I mean, they need to see it, like, because it's nearly put behind a veil at this point, and it's deliberately hidden behind a screen, and then the carrots are on a shelf and people just get the carrots. And if every person came out and bloody sowed carrots and took care of them and harvested them from start to finish, they'd be like, Jesus, no way, I'll pay you. What do you want? Like, because it's just not fair, personally, I think. So it's a good idea to have people, and on a cold, wet day.
Yeah, there's no point coming on a fine day.
Yeah.
You know, the lovely pictures on Facebook and say I want to be a farmer.
Yeah,
I suppose I'd agree with you as well, Mark. I think that there needs to be change. It needs to be focused more towards the environment as well. And there's a lot of historic payments, and you know, there's an awful, like, I mean, you know, these, not mentioning any names, but there's big beef barns making hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and the members of the royal family getting hundreds of thousands in payments, and you know, it has to be directed more carefully. But I suppose to focus in on it, then one of the biggest problems at the moment is, like, say last year when I was doing the course, there was a woman came in talking about permaculture design, and she was giving out about a farmer who had knocked all these black thorns and white thorns that were growing in a field near her, and I had said he was probably forced to knock them because with the cap payments, it has to be agricultural land is non-enclosed, or it's enclosed land, and you can't have shrubs coming out onto the field and bushes and stuff. So he wouldn't. She didn't believe me, but I went home that evening and I had a letter in the post, which I brought in the following day, which had said that there was a 2% cut in my payments because there was blackthorn coming out on. So basically, I could remove the blackthorn and take a photo and send it to them, and or accept the cut. So they took a vote in it below the college, and they said accept the cut and leave the, but nobody was prepared to put their hand in their pocket. But like, it's with that sort of policy, and like, you know, if you go back over the years, we got paid to take away ditches, we got paid to do all that kind of work and take away rough lands, and then you get paid to put them back. You get paid to clear forestry, and you get paid to plant it. Like, is there anything bad that politicians can't make worse? And like, you know, the first thing they have to do is, like, say, look, lads, there's somebody somewhere who's saying he has black thorns and white thorns coming out. Surely that's a good thing. That's a wildlife corridor. Should I be sending this letter to this guy? Like, is there anybody with a brain anywhere who would say, actually, stop, we'll ask somebody, is this wrong? And to me, it's completely wrong and it's stupid. And somebody somewhere with a small bit of cop on should put a stop to that immediately. I suppose the other thing, you know, there's an awful lot of different species and things being lost, and I think, Tírloch, you touched on it there as well. You can include among those species farmers, and the amount of farmers, like I was in England a few years ago, and they went from 20,000 dairy farmers down to 10, and in 10 years, and the average age of dairy farmers, I think, is 59. Now, in Apple, if it goes under 35, there's alarm bells ringing all over the place. So there is a unique set of skills, and farmers don't do it for the money, and it's not cool for young people to be going farming. And there's a lot of young people growing up on farms with a set of skills, and they're taking that stuff that they've, you know, this ability for hard work, and, you know, farmers don't work with the clock. The job is done when the job is finished, not when it's 5 o'clock or whatever, and most of the time. and they're taking those skills and those values, and they're taking them off into big companies and getting well rewarded for them, and they're walking around in their suits and their lovely offices, and they feel something valued. Whereas they feel if they go farming, that it's, a lot of this negativity that's coming towards farming is very damaging for young people.
Just to throw something completely different in, I wonder if there's a moment coming when the whole history of cooperation, in milk, Ger, farmers' co-ops is what's made the industry, but whether there's a new way of cooperating to try and break the stranglehold of the market on farm production, a new way of cooperating, Tírloch, when it comes to kind of horticulture and the kind of things that you're producing, because the retailers, the meat packers, whoever you want to point at, that's where all the power is in the market these days. And I just wonder whether farmers themselves, and maybe with citizens, with consumers, could find a different way of kind of packaging the product they're producing to get away from that grip. I mean, it's true everywhere. When I worked in the States, the first question that's always asked when you talk about farm policy is who holds power in the market? And it's always the huge meat packers or huge processors. And the farmer producer is a victim of that, just the price taker. So I just wonder whether there's a moment coming when there might be a different form of farmer cooperative which might address that problem. There
is. I mean, I don't go through. I had an experience with a supermarket in my first season, and I within 3 months I was like, I'm out. I'm not dealing with you. They didn't treat my produce well. They didn't treat me well. So like the people in the shop were lovely, like the manager, no problem with them. But as a entity, they didn't. It was basically they wanted my produce on the shelf so they could say, look, we're supporting the local guy. And then the people would go in and then they'd buy their loaf of bread or their Kellogg's cornflakes, whatever. And I was like, never again. It was a great lesson. I was like, not happening. So what I have done now, I'm with, not me personally, but I met a woman in Cavan, Imelda Mullen, and she has a market. So we got linked up through mutual friends, and she's brilliant. And she does a lot of promotion work on my behalf, but on behalf of, and she's connected. She's created this food network within Cavan and the surrounding 6 counties. And she's got like cheesemakers, eggs, chicken, bread, vegetables, a host of other things. And she was selling it through her market. She's obviously getting a percentage, but she earns it. Like she's not just taking the stuff, putting it on the shelf and then walking away. She's promoting, she's getting funding for us. She gets like the likes of, there's a grower called Klaus Leitenberger. She's got funding to have him come to do talks with us about composting. So she's really, really good. And then when the pandemic came, obviously, the market was off the charts, and she was like, we got to get online. And like that, she just head down, managed to do this click and collect system. She opened up a box scheme in Cavan. And so basically the way it works for me is she gets the orders. She does promotions on Instagram. I do that as well. And then she gets the orders for every customer. She's got this online ordering system. I get my orders. I got them today. I'll be harvesting in the morning, and I get it. I know exactly what I have to pick, and it goes directly to the customer. It's not sitting on a shelf for 7 days. I'll pick it in the morning. The customer is eating it that evening on their plate. And I'm happy for her to take 20%. She deserves it. Yeah. Whereas in the supermarket, I was getting, it's called sale upon return. So if it doesn't sell, they don't pay me. And if it does sell, they take the 20%. Yeah. So it was just awful. So that is the model. There's a new model, and I think it's direct to customer.
And does it work in the milk market, Ger, or
it works? It depends. It works in England. If you have a big population, like England, Germany, France.
Yeah.
Like in Germany, you've 80 million people. In Ireland, 90% of what we produce leaves the country. So, and it leaves the country through a big corporation. So they really have the toll bridge.
Yeah.
And they have a firm grip and how to be. And like, we are extremely lucky in Ireland over England that we have a good co-op structure. But unfortunately, a lot of the co-ops are only selling on to the big corporations and are price takers as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this price taker thing is fundamental. Can I just throw something different in? I mean, I was working with a bunch of farmers on Dartmoor. Have you heard of Dartmoor? It's an upland in Devon. It's beef country. Big commonage. And something new's come along in the last kind of 15 years. The water company, Dartmoor provides the water for a city called Plymouth, which is 500,000 people. And the water company, which is called South West Water, but is actually owned by the Spanish and the Chinese, I think, were having quite big costs of having to clean up the water coming off Dartmoor, because if it was burnt, you got discoloration. If it was kind of slightly overgrazed, you got discoloration. So they said to the farmers, why don't we offer you a payment, because we don't want discolored water. If you can manage your ground in a way which means the water's slightly cleaner, that saves us a lot of money. This kind of was kicked around for quite a while, this thing about payments to farmers for clean water. And I was saying all along the line, watch this, boys, because if you're not careful, this is your market of the future. Clean water to a city of 500,000, which is growing fast. You hold the commodity of the future. Don't undersell yourself. Don't get into a position where it kind of happened with milk, hasn't it, Ger? Where, the big boys have got you by the balls really, and they squeeze it. Don't undersell yourself. And so what happened was the water company offered them 10 quid a hectare, and most of them went for it. And I was saying, this is your asset. If you got together and worked together, somehow you could get a better deal. So I'm trying to tell a story of how perhaps you can weave some environmental outcomes into new forms of pricing and cooperation. And it won't be that long coming when it comes to carbon. There will be, it's kind of there, it's going to be there in carbon tax forms. Nobody loves that, but in other ways too. Blending these other income streams into land management. And then who controls that? Is it going to be the corporates, the energy companies, or is it going to be the guys on the ground collaborating and making sure, it really pays them?
Yeah, there's a great project coming out of Sligo at the moment, results-based agriculture scheme. They've done a lot of work around the pearl mussels and fresh water, like you're saying, Mark, and giving payments based on biodiversity in different parts of the land. And there's the Bride project as well doing similar. There's just
and
something
the EIP as well in Duhallow is doing work on that.
Yeah.
We got what's the name of the guy again with the Bride project? Donald Sheehan. Yeah. He came in to talk to a group of very intensive farmers that I was involved with, and I was chairing the meeting, and I actually thought that it wouldn't go down well. And I was really taken aback by the interest that these intensive farmers had in what they were doing in the Bride project. And Donald asked the question, how would you feel if you had to give 10% of your land up for biodiversity? And 2 or 3 of them said together, and they all agreed, if we got 10% more for our produce, we'd have absolutely no problem with it. Because farmers like trees and ponds and stuff anyway, and and I think that's what you were saying as well, Mark, that they need to build that into the payment for your food or whatever. Cheap food is bad for biodiversity because you need more efficiency, becomes cleaning everything out of the way. I remember in one of the Nuffield things, I was at the title of the conference was Feeding the Growing Population. And it was solely talking about how to feed more and more people and the planet. And but then someone was saying it should be feeding a growing population and making a profit, because we're producing more food and we're making less money. And now thinking about it years after, it should be feeding a growing population while making a profit and improving the environment, or certainly not harming the environment. So they're the 3 things that you need to take into the equation. And if you take out one of those legs in that stool, the stool will fall down.
Yeah. We're not asking for much, but I suppose the beauty is we have a multi-pronged approach. And something I was at the EAT, and we might kind of begin to close with this, but I was at the launch of the EAT Lancet report in UCC last year, where they were talking about, you know, what the ideal diet is in realms of the environment, and we're launching it in this context. And so much of it was talking about, you know, the dairy herds and wanting to increase the herd size by 22%. And I asked the panel, I said, what about, like, you know, using, say, more land on the west of Ireland that isn't great for, you know, dairy farming anyway, for, like, you know, what Tírloch is doing, like these biodiverse market gardens and producing more of our own veg. And the answer I got was, it's so niche that it's not going to be wanted. I was like, vegetables aren't niche for a start. But I know that...
Sorry, Mel. Vegetables are considered niche.
Well, the market gardening is niche. I know. Yeah.
That's priceless.
But since, like, Tírloch, I know you're doing that, and I'd love to hear just a little bit about your soil magic, because I think that's the key when we're looking at, you know, land that isn't seen as very viable. I think enhancing the soil is a really strong way to go, and I'd love to hear what you're up to when it comes to soil.
Yeah, well, personally, I think soil is the key. Soil is everything. So we come from the soil. We go back to the soil. Literally everything. Even this computer we're communicating from has come from soil. So what I've done, I built soil in my first year. I spent 9 months building it through. I'd old farmyard manure that was building up here from farmers renting sheds. I had organic mushroom compost, and then I did a 9-month program of green manures, and they'd mine various nutrients. They'd have deeper roots. They'd give off, like mustard, for example, which would deter the wireworm. So I did that for 9 months, and I built that was 600 meters squared. And then from there, every year I've just done a no-dig patch by planting squash into old farmyard manure, and then the next year I turn that into beds. But I'm trying to, like, everybody talks about biodiversity, and everybody just thinks butterflies and bees and birds. But biodiversity, it begins in the soil, and it starts with plants, and there's various trophic levels, and basically we need plants in the ground to photosynthesize, and then obviously within that you have roots in the ground. Obviously we know about photosynthesis, but maybe a lot of people wouldn't understand that when a plant photosynthesizes, it's creating sugar, but it doesn't take all that sugar for itself. It shares it. It shares it with the bacteria. It shares it with the fungi. If you've got a biologically rich soil, it can share up to 80% of that sugar with the bacteria and with the fungi, because it knows, if I keep this population alive, they will grant me access to more bioavailable plant nutrients. And then you'll have, your bacteria, fungi feeding off the exudates coming from the plant that is photosynthesizing. Then, you've got that their populations increase. Then you'll have protozoa, nematodes, predator biology, and they'll come along, and then they'll eat the bacteria and fungi. And when they eat them, they consume them, they digest them, they excrete them. Whatever excess nutrients they don't need for their bodily structure will then become readily available for the plant to take up instantly in the root zone. It's not just going to happen 50 feet away. It happens right in the root zone, in the rhizosphere. So this is all happening if you have a biologically healthy, rich soil. And this whole idea that we need to add vast amounts of fertilizers, it's it wasn't a deliberate thing, but it's wrong. Like, what happened was, plowing was been around since the ancient times, and that was damaging the soil slowly. And then somebody came along with nitrogen fertilizers and noticed that it makes the grass grow quicker. We're like, oh yeah, it must be good. Yeah. But it turns out it's a salt. So all it's going to do really is going to kill biology, and it's going to make water unavailable to biology. So your biology is going to die. Therefore, you're going to have to keep adding fertilizers. Sorry, go on.
Tírloch, if you could add to that, there was a scientific study done, I believe it was in Oxford, over 100 years, where they put a patch, they fertilized one patch of ground and they left the other ground, and then they wanted to see the difference in the species. So they found the small patch of ground. I believe they were about a quarter of an acre, so they weren't very large. What happened was that they found that the one that they didn't fertilize, the species dropped from about 100 to about 90, maybe about 98. That's generally because it was such a small part of land. The area that was fertilized, it dropped from about 100 down to about 4.
Yeah.
So again, fertilizer really does take away the biological diversity.
Well, they're all.
I think, Tírloch, you push your finger on the point that's going to change agriculture over the next 50 years. Is like guys like me will have to go from, we know all about feeding the plant, we know nothing about feeding the soil. And that transition, and the problem is that that transition is getting no funding because there's an awful lot of money being made by big corporations out of what we're doing.
Yeah.
And there's very little money to be made for big corporations doing what you're talking about, which is the right thing to be. That's the direction we should be looking at. And that's why we're doing the mixed species as well. It's like the way we grow at the grass at the moment, you could grow it on rockwool. It's like aeroponics because you're providing everything that the plant needs, bringing it in. And it's better than what they're doing in the rest of Europe and the rest of the world, where they're, plowing up huge thousands of acres of maize and soybean and all that. It is more natural, but I think the real research has to go into taking what you're talking about there and putting that into a widespread scale in agriculture in Ireland. If we can do that in Ireland, then we have a really green, unique product that we can be really proud of. And I think that's something we should really aspire to.
See, I'm hoping to, I'm studying to be able to brew this biology that I speak of. I'm learning how to make compost in quite a unique way. And I'll be observing my compost at certain stages, and I'll be able to look in the microscope and say, yeah, I've got good bacteria, good fungi, I've got my protozoas, nematodes, it's good stuff. And I'll be able to see if there's bad guys as well. And, if there's any bad guys, such as ciliates, they'd be called, it's a sign you're going anaerobic, and this is where you would want to steer away from.
One of the biggest wastes on farms is the farmyard manure.
Yeah,
is never properly composted, and it's a waste that's spread out, and you have straw and all that. It's and free nitrogen that's leaching. Whereas, like, we didn't spread any farmyard manure last year. We have it all stored. And this year we have it stored, and we're trying to do the same. We turned it 2 or 3 times, and we have a thermometer, and we're measuring it. I think that's a huge resource.
Yeah,
but
massive.
We still don't know how to speed it up or how to do it properly. And I know there's guys out there who specialize in that, but it's something I'd really be interested in learning.
Yeah. Well, today I received 2 old bales of silage from a friend, and I'm going to turn that into compost. And it's the same thing. There's this stuff is lying on farms that farmers maybe don't necessarily know how to manage, because 1, you need a lot of equipment to do it, and 2, you suppose you need to know how to do it. I'm only learning, but I mean, I'm hoping.
I suppose one of the other things we need to, it's the circular economy. What the wastes we're producing are not waste.
No.
We need to learn how to turn those into energy and into fertilizer and into feeding the bacteria in the soil. Unfortunately, the knowledge and the research around that is scarce, and then to transfer that onto farms and whose interest it is.
There's a word which I don't know whether I love it or hate it, called innovation, and that either kind of gets done in some commercial setting, or it can get done in any other setting. And I'm really liking what I'm hearing about trying things. Tírloch, you're learning as you go, you're working it out, you're part of a network. I'm sure, Ger, you're kind of talking about different things, mixed species swards, seeing what's going to happen there. Is there space, or is everybody on a treadmill? I mean, if you've got a big dairy set up, if you've got time to think and space in your life to think about innovation, the mixed species business, for instance, is that something you can really follow through?
We did 6 acres last year. There's 15 more acres going in this year. You become the average of the 5 people you hang around with. I think Jim Rohn said that years ago.
Yeah.
Love that.
And
One of my friends says it to me all the time.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the 5 people you hang around with are the people you hang around with, but they're also the stuff you read, and you know, being involved in stuff like this. And sometimes when you begin to question yourself, it's very easy if you're in a group and you're just with a group of farmers and all the farmers are doing the same thing. You're going to be pulled that way. But I think when you have friends who are interested in the environment, coming from a different side of it, it kind of holds you back a small bit, and it makes you think, and to start to question yourself. I think Oscar Wilde, I think just Oscar Wilde said the problem with the world is that the intelligent people are always questioning themselves, and the stupid ones are cocksure themselves. So I think it's good to be questioning yourself all the time and saying, I don't know, is that the right thing? Is there a better way? But I'm certainly questioning the whole fertilizer thing at the moment. And you know, I think for me, the mixed species and what Tírloch's talking about there, the soil biology, there is so much to be learned on that. It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all. I feel like we've churned up so many questions for everybody listening and for each other, which I think is exactly the point of conversations like this. And it feels like the perfect time to just share that we have live events on May 28th from 7 to 9 and June 4th from 7 to 9 as well on Zoom, where we're just kind of coming together to chat like this, but with a wider group of people. And they won't be recorded, but it is just about, you know, discussing this more, weaving more of those connections, like that gorgeous, you know, network of people you have around you, Tírloch, and your farm. And, you know, yeah, I have to say conversations like this make me feel full of energy and really hopeful for the future. And I know we could go on and talk and talk and talk. Yeah, I just want to say thank you very much, all of you, for being here. It's been really insightful. And if there's any last words anyone would like to say before we close, you're very welcome.
Can I recommend a book?
Yes, please.
It's actually I found it today. So if you're interested in the soil biology, it's called Teeming with Microbes, by Jeff Lovenfels. And it's not highly, it's for anybody to read. It doesn't get too technical, but it literally describes what I just said in far better words. And it's fascinating. There's a universe down there that, like, it's universes within universes that we live in, we inhabit. So if you want to learn more, I would highly recommend it. It's a great book.
Gorgeous.
Thank you, Tírloch.
Yeah.
And if people wanted to find more about you, or wanted to find you, where would they find more about you and your projects? Me
personally?
Everyone.
Well, I'm on the farm is on Instagram. I use it as a business platform. It's just the veg patch, the veg_patch, I think. The_veg_patch. So I just do everything through that. I just try and do, a couple of videos a week, and that's how I promote myself, So that's it.
That's great. Brilliant, Tírloch.
I think our farm is on Facebook and Instagram. It's the old farmhouse at Laharn Dairy. If the land was neglected like our social media, there'd be nothing growing, because we don't go on Facebook and stuff that much. But I'm lucky that I have a girl working who's a very good photographer, and she loves animals, and she loves wildflowers and stuff like that. So she's always taking photos and putting them up and sharing or tagging us in them. So that's Farmhouse in Laharn Dairy.
Gorgeous.
Fantastic. Thank you.
If somebody's put my name in a search engine, they would find all sorts of things, some of which I'm proud of and some which I'm not. But I'm happy to say some of the things I've done have failed completely. But, that's how you learn.
Absolutely, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark.
Gurf míle buíochas slat for your listening ears. Tá tú ag éisteach an scéal sin. I'm sure I've said that wrong, but I have a couple of words in there anyway. I think I've seen a couple of classes out on the land where you can hike and learn Irish, so I'm eager to get to a few of those this year. I find it very hard to read Irish, so reading out of a dictionary is just a tough one. But yeah, thank you for being here. As always, you can contribute. You'll find all the links on our website. Thank you so much for being here. You listening really is key, and we hope to see you at the live events. And in the meantime, I wish to leave you with this beautiful poem by Sean English, who I think is currently down somewhere in Kinsale milking cows and being stung by bees. And he wrote this beautiful ode to the earth. And we will leave you with that this week and join you again next week for more conversations and tales from the land.
Dearest dirt, the erstwhile earth, thou art our dewy domus and droplet of domain that hath reigned o'er all, and on all have hotly reigned, torrentially and plentifully. We do well always, and with all water everywhere, to give your terran terrain thanks for filling up our water tanks and gutters. Guying gushes rush and swell and make the flowers bloom and smell. Mother Nature and other more mushroomy creators conspire to create a spell upon our million musterings, nurturing naturally and minding marvellously our organic bioclusterings. Clouds accumulated, fog dissipated, ferns unfurled and trees upturned towards your husband's sun, and at night all watched over by that crocodile we call the moon. Your blue-green abused hue shines through, your crystal gems and metals imbue. We love you, Mother. Even if and even when we pretend we didn't come from you and you don't matter. You will always be our home, our cave, our great grand mater.